Hi, and thank you for joining me today, and welcome to this session, which is part of the Next Generation End User Computing Summit. And one of the things I want to talk about is all too often we hear from users that their end user device is woefully underpowered, or they want different types of devices for different tasks. And it's a question to us as IT people about how do we give them the power and the flexibility that they constantly need, and but also how can we manage this? And ultimately, how can we pay for it? How can we empower our users while allowing them to use lots of different device types seamlessly? And I kind of want to take some time today to look at how we can balance these needs. They're ever competing, but we need to be able to achieve that elusive thing that's out there, the satisfied user, if you like, by designing a solution that gives multiple end user device formats and lets users request resources on demand and also allows them to work anywhere. But we've also got to keep them secure. We've got to keep them safe. We've got to not blow the budget while we're doing it. My name's Simon Ratcliffe, and I'm a consultant with probably 25 years experience now in building solutions that I always think are designed to please users and to try and make technology more simple. I love the notion that we can take what should be really complex issues and actually essentially make them simple. And I really enjoy tasks or challenges where I'm being asked to join legacy and modern systems together. And I think this is one of the key systems that a lot of organizations are facing today, that there's lots of solutions out there that can deliver what end users want, but we actually often look at those from the IT perspective as really hard when we look at all the back end systems that we're trying to join together. Now, you'll see as I talk, there's a question window on your screen. If you want to ask questions, fire them at me as I go along. I will try and answer them as I go along because it's probably better to try and answer questions when they actually occur as opposed to gather them all up at the end. Anything that doesn't fit naturally into the flow, then I'll wash up at the end. So, what I'm going to try and do here is I'm going to start with sharing some views, just some thoughts, and then I want to support that afterwards, if you like, with some stories about where we've actually managed to achieve the right answer for some very different organizations, where we've actually found solutions to what I think some of us look at as an almost insurmountable problem in many ways, or we look at some of the potential options that are out there and go, yeah, not quite right yet. And I think there are some misnomers, there are some misunderstandings, and one of those is that I've had it often said to me that aren't the modern end user solutions really only accessible where the systems behind them are also modern? And I think the answer to that is no. In fact, I think it's sometimes it's even easier if you've got this nice legacy blend, shall we call it, behind everything else. So what I actually want to do to start with is actually take a look at the idea of virtual desktops. I think a lot of organizations have taken a look at VDI in its many, many forms, and there are many forms, and that's one of the keys here. There isn't just one answer to all of this, although some organizations would have you believe that. But as organizations have looked at it, they've kind of shied away because they feel perhaps there's too much legacy. They perhaps think there's latency sensitive systems in there. There's just too many bits and pieces to join together that actually VDI could never work because actually where would you put it? And I think I just want to explore this a little bit further, and I want to challenge some of these because actually I think it's a better solution than it's given credit for in many ways. And some of the problems that are out there are actually not as insurmountable as people think they are. So a virtual desktop or virtual desktop infrastructure VDI essentially is technology that allows users to access and interact with a complete desktop computing environment that's hosted on remote servers or in remote data centers or in a data center. And I think that's the thing. I think the word remote has crept in there and doesn't necessarily need to. And I'll talk about that later. Instead of relying on the traditional local compute power all being in front of the user, the users connect to these using whatever device they want essentially, and that's the key. This can be all about whatever device people want to use, and we all have different devices for different circumstances in many ways. And I met somebody the other day who proudly showed me the fact he was carrying 3 laptops around for different functions to have to be worked on in different areas, and that absolutely blew my mind because First of all, that was several kilos more weight than I would want to carry around. It was possibly actually a bit of a security risk. It just didn't strike me as logical, and yet I still see people with tablets, with phones, with trying to synchronize everything. And actually, VDI is a way of doing that because they can connect to something else over the internet. And essentially, the virtual bit of VDI separates the desktop environment, and that includes the operating systems and the applications and the data away from the local device. So I think it is probably worth just briefly having a look at what the various components of VDI are. I think it's important that we understand what's going on here. So, ultimately what we have at the heart of it host servers. They're at the core. I mean, these can be physical, they can be virtualized, and they host multiple virtual machines. Literally, each one of those representing a desktop. And there will always be a level of virtualization because that's what creates the virtual desktops. It doesn't have to sit on a virtual server. It can sit on a physical server, but you still need the abstraction layer to be able to create the desktops in the first place, because what you're doing is you're creating multiple desktops on any particular server. Um, you know, each one is running on the host server. The desktop server, you can run any desktop system on a VDI. So it can be Windows, it can be Linux, it can be, to a degree, Mac, although Mac clearly don't like that. They prefer that on their own hardware. And it can run on any server operating system as well. Again, let's not just get into, oh, it's Windows on Windows, and therefore the answer has to be a Microsoft solution. It isn't. And that's one of the keys I think we need to bear in mind as we go through all of this. So we also need a connection broker, which allows us to manage those user connections, because there is a management level in there that's important, and as well as the user devices, because they go to a connection broker, it all goes virtual. The users can pretty much use whatever they want to get to it. And again, you're not forcing people down a specific operating system route line. You can have somebody who wants to use a Linux desktop using a Windows-based VDI, or vice versa. It's really not a problem. It becomes a matter of choice, and I think that's one of the things that compels users around this. Now, the network infrastructure is obviously an issue, because one of the things that people automatically go when they look at VDI and say, that's the problem. If there's not a network, VDI doesn't work. Again, not necessarily true, depending on how you've got it set up. However, this is where, when people look at this, we do need to, I think, make investment in network infrastructure. That said, so much of our world these days lives on the network. It lives out in SaaS world, it lives out in cloud world, it lives out in data center world, that I think this is a bit like preaching to the converted. Everybody, for everything, network is king these days. Storage, obviously, underneath it, everything is stored in the data center, which again is brilliant. However, this is about getting good high performance. Yeah, people who look at that, and what we do need is, we definitely need high performance storage there. But again, that's getting cheaper. That's getting easier to put out there. It's getting an effective option, and we can manage and monitor it more easily that way, because we do need specialized tools for this. And again, I've seen a lot of these fail, not because the original design has failed, not because the infrastructure that was built was failed, but because there was a bit of scrimping, shall we say, on the management and monitoring tools, and people didn't necessarily know what was going on. I think the other element in here as well is security. Just looking at it, it's about, okay, we're connecting over the internet. How do we protect that? We're not moving data. The upside of this is the data stays inside the data center. The downside is it needs to move down to the device, and therefore we need to think about how we encrypt it, how we manage it, how we look after it. And that also therefore applies to things like, how do we back these up? It's actually easier, I think, to back them up out of a data center, because otherwise half the time you're relying on end users to back stuff up, and it doesn't matter what you say, end users will store things locally half the time without realizing it, some of the times willfully because they think it's faster, and it doesn't get backed up, and that becomes a problem. And then obviously in all of this, as users grow, as the whole system expands, we've got to be able to manage it. We've got to be able to sort of drive that view down, and make sure that we can scale horizontally and vertically across all of this. So, I mean, essentially, I think VDI is an infrastructure where we've got we've got the desktops running on the remote servers. They can come from various devices, and we've got all of those components in there. And there are advantages to this. It does. It offers flexibility. It offers centralization. It offers, I think, efficient resource utilization. And I think therefore it is suitable for quite a wide range of uses. I mean, if we take some of those, I mean, if we look at the flexibility and mobility part of it, I mean, yeah, they're the favorite phrases of so much technology today. But what does it actually mean? It means work anywhere. And one of the examples I'll show you later is actually, virtual desktops allow you to access your desktop from virtually anywhere with an internet connection, and that gives you the ability to move around. But actually, network connections are so much more widely available. And one of the examples I'm going to show you is people working from the middle of a field, literally from the middle of a field. And it gives us device independence as well. So the device in the middle of a field, you're not going to sit there with a desktop. You're probably not going to sit there with a laptop. But actually, the kind of devices that I'm talking about that we put in the middle of a field worked really well. And it allows people to access this and makes it easier to adapt. And there was a massive, massive efficiency saving in that one. Now, normally when we have flexibility, there's a trade-off. And one of those is security. But actually, I think VDI wise, we actually gain security because we have that centralization of the data and everything is more secure in the data center. We do reduce the risk of data loss, especially, device damage, device theft. It's we can protect against that. And they also make it easier for some managing the security because it's easier to enforce policies, updates, patch, etc., access control when things are more centralized. It's always easier to manage and update a bunch of devices when they're all in one place. So the inevitable reaction to that is, well, that's all expensive then, isn't it? It must be. Well, no, not necessarily. I mean, VDI quite often brings us cost efficiency because we have to do the whole mapping of all the costs because we've got hardware savings because actually we can manage the hardware. But I would challenge most people, and I've done this as an exercise in organizations, and I've looked at things like power consumption. Even the power consumption of 100 laptops compared to VDI, there's a saving. It's just we don't see it. What unfortunately we get when we look at VDI in a data center is we do get lamped with a power cost. And that's possibly a problem because you don't see that cost on the other side of the equation. So we have to be able to compare like with like. But we also get reduced maintenance costs because actually it's easier on the whole usually to manage VDI. So we end up with less running around like headless chickens. And I think the ability to scale it up, scale it down, move it around, it's a bit like cloud was when it first came out. I suspect VDI is still in that place that at the moment what we're doing is we know we can scale it up and down, but we're not actually necessarily doing it. And therefore, in many ways, what we're doing is we are not yielding some of the benefit that's there. Now, obviously, there are also some disadvantages. And the obvious one that's always called out is this dependency on the internet or network. VDI does require a stable connection. But actually, it's not hard to get a stable connection these days in most places, certainly in the UK, certainly across most of Europe, US, a lot of Africa even, potentially where you're using some of the devices. And I go back to my example of people working in the field. 5G is still a relatively stable internet connection, and a lot of devices will hit that. I know it's not ubiquitous. It won't be for a while, and there are black spots. I live in one of them. I know it's there, but you know, we can mitigate against it. And actually, if we design the environment right in the first place, you don't need this absolute 100% persistence. That you can actually allow for it. I think one of the issues that comes across quite often, though, and I've heard thrown up, particularly applied to legacy systems, is latency. I don't think older systems were necessarily designed and built with any sense of a future being connected to or accessed across the internet, and actually that does make them susceptible to latency issues. That said, a way around that is to actually put the desktop next to the server anyway. If you put it all in the same place, you can resolve some of those issues. So actually, I'm still of the opinion that VDI in many ways can address these issues potentially better than web browsing or something like that can. I think cost is the other one that's thrown out there. I think often VDI is seen as far more expensive than, let's call them, the more traditional approaches. There are two elements. The initial setup costs can be expensive with hardware, software, and licensing. Again, that depends on how you do it. If you go and buy something for internal, yes, you will have that capital cost. Again, you potentially would have the capital cost for devices anyway. If you do it from a cloud-based solution, if you go and buy it as a service, then you don't get the upfront cost. Yes, you get the ongoing subscription fees. Again, rather like a lot of cloud fees, if these are managed effectively, they're not prohibitive. They shouldn't be prohibitive. And it's about comparing cost in some respects. And I think there's a lot of other perceived issues, and I call them perceived because I'm not convinced that some of these are as significant barriers as they're often suggested to be. I think we often perceive complexity as an issue, and that's complexity of implementation, if you like, the setting up, the maintaining. I mean, yes, it can be complex. It can require expertise in networking, security, and virtualization, and compatibility and testing. But the reality is, we get a lot of that with normal end user devices anyway. If we were doing a major OS upgrade, for example, we're going to face a lot of these. And I think there are issues, and again, these may be slightly different issues, but there are issues of data. There is an argument about if you buy this as a service, if you're in a regulated industry, because the data sits in a data center now and not on a desktop, where is that data? And I think that's a challenge. It is a challenge, and it's a question that needs to be asked. So I think it's I would suggest it's safe to say at a basic level that using a VDI type environment for remote work, or even, to be honest, office-based work to a degree, does offer significant benefits with flexibility, security, and I would argue cost efficiency, but some will argue the other way. It does come with challenges, but again, I don't think any of them are showstoppers, and I think sometimes people have stopped, paused, and gone, "Nah, I can't. It's not going to work. It's not going to work for me." And I don't think that's the case. I think actually what we should be able to do is we should be able to challenge a lot of those. And I've picked two quite extreme examples to talk about later to try and do that. So I think I'm starting to see VDI now genuinely emerging as transformational technology, and I don't like the word transformational. It's too overused, but I think it is genuinely reshaping the way we are thinking, because those that are doing it are gaining significantly, and they're gaining commercial and competitive benefit in doing it, and that becomes significant. It becomes far more of a compelling business case than I just want to get rid of some laptops and I want to put something else in its place. If you look at it like that, it'll never win. If you look at it, can it transform your business? It certainly can. And that's the impact of how we work, how we collaborate, how we interact with the technology, I think is genuinely quite profound. And I think this will continue to evolve. I do think it's the future, and I think there's potential to explore this and have a look at it. And if we look at, if you like, the positive impacts that VDI has, it is redefining workplaces. We lost the traditional office 2 or 3 years ago, but it hasn't come back. It's now becoming remote work, for example, is becoming fundamentally more accepted. It's just general. But it's also, we're not wanting to be trapped in our houses. We want to be able to move around. We want to be able to go wherever we want and just feel like what we've got in front of us is what we have. I start some work first thing in the morning, perhaps sitting at my desk here. I pull my tablet out. I go and get on the truck. I can carry on with the same experience. I can work like that, and because I'm just connected to something that's going on in the background, and that is a significant part of what this is about. And this is about adapting to these modern work styles. It's about wanting to move as we work. I think we went from the office to we went to home, and they were both static environments. What we've learned from that, and I think this is more emerging, is that actually this is more about being on the go. This is more about moving these days. It's not about, we don't have that fixed place anymore. And I think this VDIs can accommodate this by making it consistent and accessible and secure wherever you are, whatever you're doing, and making sure that works. And it enables that kind of collaboration, because there's a lot more collaboration tools around now that can actually sit on those. Yes, we can access those in different ways. Absolutely, we can. But there is a greater consistency in some respects by doing that through VDI, because we have the centralized resources. We have this ability to keep it in the middle, and we can allow people to share things more easily in many ways to their end user devices, because it's not going to the end user device, it's staying in the middle. And as more people come on, we've got that ability to add and move and shovel people around, but also to scale up and scale down. And again, I'll talk later in an example about how that becomes significant value in all of this. So we also have some other elements in there that I think are very different. We have a resilience to disaster. This isn't about disaster recovery. This is about, in many ways, avoiding it in the first place. It's potentially, depending on who it is, can be a disaster. It's certainly a disaster for the individual if they lose their device, because they just lose everything that's on it. It takes a while to set somebody up if you take a traditional laptop type device. If all they've got is a device that accesses a VDI, and that device gets broken, lost, or stolen, first of all, you haven't lost any data, which is good. It's easy to get them a device. Just they can go in on another device, because actually all you need is a browser connection most of the time. It's about making that a far easier. And actually, not only do they only need a browser connection, when they go in, it'll be exactly where it was when they left. So that's even better. You can lose a device and not lose any of your work in the same process. And we all have the sustainability story. This is far more sustainable. Yes, it's nice to have a powerful laptop sitting on the desk, because you've got that processing. It gives you a comfort. It also draws a lot more power than a much lighter weight device. And you plug a lot of those in. The power draw on that is significant. People don't measure it, interestingly. It's very rare that even when everybody was in the office, I could go to an organization and say, what is the cost of your desktop estate? It was an incalculable, because I mean, I can work it out, because you can work out what the power draw is for a device over a period of time. And the other problem was, a lot of organizations would say, leave them on overnight, please, because that's when we patch and update them. So again, these things were running potentially 24/7. And even if it's not doing a lot, there's still quite a large power draw against these devices, and I think that becomes quite significant. So I also genuinely believe that as the VDI becomes more possible, becomes more adopted, that actually it will drive innovation, but it will be driven by innovation as well. So it's in many ways, I suppose, the more we go to browser-based applications, the less we need an end-user device at all. But actually, we might as well just use an end-user device that's in the center, even if it's scaled right down. It's still more effective, it's still more efficient, and it still makes sure the data's in the right place. So even as we go to a much more SaaS-driven world, I still think VDI is the way to do it. And the other problem we used to have with VDI is everybody looked the same. It was all out there. But now we've got that ability to personalize it, to actually try and create a better user experience. And we're getting to the point now with some of the options out there, that AI type personalization, it's almost anticipating the user needs, and it kind of gives that seamless and very much more productive work environment around it. And ultimately, let's not forget about security and compliance. You know, our privacy concerns are growing, our data security concerns are growing. You can't turn around these days without hearing about there are issues. It's a device left, it's, a spy left a laptop on a train. I mean, I know that's a bit of a hackneyed story, but that happens daily. If you actually go and ask the train companies, the number of devices that get left on trains with data on them. And yes, a lot of them get given back. A lot of them find their users, but it's and I'm not saying you would leave them there if they weren't, but you wouldn't have to remote wipe them, you wouldn't have to do a lot of the other stuff. And I think there is this um, issue of I think VDI is definitely at the forefront of shaping the future of work and the way the phrase remote collaboration often gets associated with VDI, and that sounds like that's a couple of people having a chat, an online chat in the background. It's not. It's about actually how users can collaborate beyond that. And again, one of the stories I'll share will show you that. But I think it genuinely has revolutionized the workplace, and that's significant. And I think it's going to continue to do that. I think it can adapt and evolve a lot quicker. And actually, more users want to use their own devices. More users want to be able to sit in front of a physical device that they like. BYOD is still big. It's growing. It's being driven by the generation that are coming into work now. They don't want to be told they have to use the corporate standard in this way. They want the freedom on the one side, but we need the control on the other. And actually, you can do that. You can quite easily say, look, do what you want over on your own device. However, when you connect into the corporate world, this is how you do it. And there's essentially a firewall between the two. And that gives us that security and that gives them that freedom. And that also allows us to provide a level of computing power that we can do that. I do think still, though, one of the issues is, or one of it's almost like a marketing issue with VDI is that people seem to think legacy, red line, won't work, can't do it. It's a bit like strong graphics, red line, can't do it. Actually, and I'm only going to deal with legacy for now, I'll come back to graphics in a minute. VDIs, I think, can be a perfect solution for legacy infrastructure. And I think there's some really compelling reasons. It's actually what you can do with a VDI is you can actually use a legacy desktop if you want to within a modern desktop more easily, far more easily than trying to do it on a local device. Trying to do kind of Windows on Windows or old containerized Linux environments, one inside the other. You can do that far more easily sitting on the server, controlling. You can give a user multiple desktops actually if you want to, and just channel them all together. So I think that actually it's legacy is easier in that respect on a VDI than it is on a device. I think also um, it's easier to manage and maintain because legacy systems on the whole we're trying to do something about. We might be applying one of the the 7Rs because there's 6R, 5R models, but one of the 7Rs. And we will probably be trying to do something with our legacy world. And as that changes, we need to be able to change the desktop that copes with it. Well, that's easier if the desktop's in the middle. We can change that as we go along. We don't have to again to reach out, especially if that's become quite complex on the end user device. And I think, let's be fair, quite a few legacy systems probably lack security type features that are available in modern environments, if I can put it politely like that. But I think if we can get the client side part of that into VDI, we can probably far more easily secure it. We can use, I don't know, network segmentation or access controls. We can build protection around some of this sensitive data. And the other thing I think we can do is we can actually make sure the resources are more or better allocated. Legacy uses resources in a different way to modern systems in many cases, and we can just make sure they get what they need. We don't need to put them on big powerful desktop machines to make them work. So there are elements like that, and I think all of these elements that are held up with legacy and held up as the problems are not the problems, they're actually benefits. And I think it also puts it on that far easier journey to modernization. And we can hit compliance and regulatory requirements far more easily as well. I think it becomes a lot better to be able to go out there and have a look and see what's going on. It's all about, in many ways, just breaking free of hardware. What we're actually trying to do is we're trying to create a centralized computing environment. So we're sitting in the data center. We're not sitting out there. We've broken free of all of this. So that means we can manage the resources far more effectively, and we can create device independence for the users, and that's important to them. That keeps them happy. That hence the title of this. I need more power. Power isn't necessarily about I want more processor, I want more memory, I want more disk. It's actually, some of that is about I want more freedom. I want to be able to do what I want to be able to do when I want to do it, but I also acknowledge, in many cases, that you as a corporation have to do have a responsibility to do that. But I want to be able to get via any client, and I want operating system independence. I want to be able to sit in my house on my Linux machine because that's what I like. But I need to be able to access the corporate environment, and that probably isn't running on that. But I need that to be done seamlessly. And I think that's important. I need it to be done seamlessly because I need this cross-platform compatibility. I need to be able to switch between devices and different operating systems and different form factors. I might want to switch from my Android phone to my iPad to my Windows desktop to my Linux laptop whenever, and still be able to get the same experience on the corporate network. Yeah, and I want to be able to do that in a way that also means that I don't have to worry about whether my session is persistent, whether or not I'm going to lose what I was doing before, because that's quite important. And I also want to know that I am secure and my data is protected. But also, sometimes I just want to do a massive processing job on my machine, and I need that scalability in there. And that becomes important. It's the ability to do that. So that's my own perception, clearly, in all of this. And I think it's important in all of these things, and it always is important when you're listening to somebody like me, to not take my word for it. I want to tell you about a couple of examples, a couple of clients I've worked with, very different organizations, very different answers, but they were actually, in many ways, both VDI. So the first one, I talked about working in a field earlier. This is an organisation. It's a national organisation in the UK. It's essentially, it's an engineering consulting business, and they realised, as a lot of organisations like this are realising, that things like geospatial scanning, a lot of the architectural type products, a lot of design elements these days, especially 3D design, creates a monumental amount of data. But a lot of this data also needs to be collected. So what happens is, if we take an example where someone like a geospatial technician goes out into the field, and I literally sometimes mean a field, they will scan perhaps a piece of land, perhaps a building, perhaps whatever, but they will scan all of this data. Now, traditionally, what they've done is they've scanned this data and they've scanned it onto a device, and the device has captured that data. It's gone onto an SD card, and there are typically potentially terabytes of data at this point, because it's raw data. It's literally taking millions of scanning points a second. They then have to take this SD card, they have to go and drive back to an office where they have to plug it into a desktop, because there are no laptops powerful enough to drive these things. They are monumental, because the problem is there's a two-stage processing process that's used here. One of which is very CPU intensive and one of which is very GPU intensive. So you can imagine what the actual device that they were using looks like. And there's a limitation then at this point, because it doesn't matter how big the scan is. There's the bounding factor, if you like, here is the desktop machine itself, what the processing power is in there. It takes a certain amount of time. And it will just churn away and churn away and churn away and churn away. Sometimes it will fail because it will run out of processing power. It will literally gum itself up. But it has to be processed twice to get to a point where that data can then be shared. That can and has taken days. So why is VDI a really good answer to this? Well, VDI is quite a good answer because one of the reasons that they struggled with taking the data from anywhere other than the SD card was because to get it back onto a PC to process it means it would have had to have gone somehow through their own offices. It would have to come back into their offices, and that was not a route that the network was essentially designed for. However, 5G into a cloud, which is where we built the VDI environment, very different. So actually, and most of these scanning devices are 5G enabled. So what we've done is we've built a system where now actually what happens is it caches a copy on an SD card. You know, fields are fields, 5G is 5G. We accept it doesn't always work, but actually most of the time it does. And it will stream that data straight back up to their desktop. That desktop can start to process that data while they're still in the field. They haven't even left the field at this point. They haven't got to drive back to an office. We've already actually saved a day on the processing time. We've already saved that day because invariably you will go out one day, collect it, go into the office the next day and start to process it. Actually, we can kick that processing job off overnight. And because we're sitting on VDI, we can scale up in the first instance, we can scale up the CPU massively. Yes, arguably that's expensive, but actually as soon as it's finished, we just shut it down again. It's on a management process that does that. It can then throw the job into the second part. There have been jobs that traditionally have taken 3 or 4 days because of the literally the lag of having to drive into the office that have been finished by the time they've had lunch the next day. And then the machines have all scaled down. So they're not actually costing that much. The calculations on that one show that by being able to do the work faster, more reliably, and therefore getting back to the client quicker, yields an invoice weeks ahead of where it used to be, which yields payment weeks ahead of where it used to be. There is literally a cost benefit in doing it. It also means that on average, we think, and we're still trying to prove this, but we think that most of the technicians out in the field can do almost twice as much work because they haven't got the driving, they haven't got the stability issues, they haven't got they can literally scale up and scale down on these devices whenever they need to. Now, there's a ton of other benefits all the way around it, but that's the really simple example of why VDI works for these guys. And actually, the massively expensive, because you can imagine they were multiple thousands of pounds for the hardware for each person to have the processing power. Yes, they still have those. That was a sunk cost. So it will take some time to recover this sunk cost. But actually going forward, because this is a fast growing business, because they have a reputation for being so quick and so efficient, it's going to be even faster growing for them. So it works really, really well. VDI is what unlocks that. Everybody looked at me when I suggested that and went, that will never work. But it did. The other one I'd like to talk about is different. This is about an organization that does software development, but it does highly secure software development. So you have to be physically, ideally, in one of their offices. There are parts of their office where when you go in there, you literally, there is no internet connectivity. You have to be connected to a particular set of machines. Now, I can't do anything about that. You have to be in that world to be able to do that. But the less secure, more secure development, if you like, is still secure. Still has to sit inside their organization, could never exist in the cloud. Their compliance, their governance would not allow this. What we actually did with them is we built a Linux-based VDI solution. We used a product called Guacamole to do it, that actually delivers a VDI client out to users and allows them to develop securely within their own environment. So what we had before was we had users essentially who had to be probably in an office, not necessarily, but probably in an office, or they had to be VPN'd in quite carefully, and it was quite restrictive, and they had to have multiple different devices to do it because not all devices were secure or registered as secure. So what they ended up with on the whole, these were people who usually carried two devices around with them, one of which was their corporate laptop, so they could do email, they could do chats, they could do usual admin stuff. and the other one was their development laptop that plugged into this particular network and had these security protocols on it. By making that second laptop a VDI and putting that VDI essentially on their corporate laptop, because it will create there's the firewall between the laptop and the VDI. What we've done is we've enabled the development in the secure world, but they've still got access to their corporate stuff, which is still sitting on the same laptop. We've just saved a laptop per developer. Now, when we're talking over 600 developers here, that's quite a lot of laptops. And that makes a significant difference, especially as what was built in terms of the infrastructure. Yes, there are some servers in there, but most of the software on there is free. It's you know, with things like Linux on there. This is not, and this is what I mean. Don't always assume as soon as you hear VDI, don't assume it means Citrix or Azure. It doesn't. There are plenty of other options out there. It's just being a little bit creative about how you use them. I think it's significant that, and these are two quite extreme examples, both of whom started off with a conversation that said, well, that will never work on something like VDI. Actually, both of them did. And I think that's quite important that both of them did, because it tells us actually it's about how you look at the problem. I think too many people look at VDI and they've got a very negative view, a very historic view of it that says it's hard work, it's expensive, it's unreliable, users don't like it. I think if you can create a situation where you've got people in the field scanning really happily, and you've got a bunch of developers who are notoriously picky about their technology, again, happy about the environment they're working in because they have the flexibility, they can use what they want on there. And yet in both cases, you've also got a very happy IT function at the middle of it. You've got the IT admins looking at this going, wow, this is quite easy, this is good, I like this. Then I think that's a win-win. And I think that is about we've empowered the users. And I go back to the original tenet of this conversation when I said, you know, I need more power, say the users. When I hear that, I don't necessarily hear, I want more processor, I want more memory, I want more faster storage or whatever. What I hear is, I want control over my world. I want to be able to do my job more effectively. I want to be able to do my job more efficiently. And I think if you make a business case, in both of these cases, the business cases were not built on it is cheaper to have VDI than it is to have laptops. That doesn't whichever way you look at that, that's probably going to come out near enough net neutral. But you can make it work whichever way you want. If you use something like a bit like trying to apply ROI to a business case, it's not going to work like that. This is about how we made the business more efficient. This is about how we got to value to cash far, far quicker. This is how we got more developer hours out of every developer because we could use downtime that they weren't previously using. They could collaborate more easily. They didn't have to carry so much rubbish around with them. That's where the value in all of this lies. And it's about how you look at it from that perspective. And I think that is quite important. So hopefully what you've heard here is a different perspective slightly on what could be regarded as a bit of an old topic. Yeah, if somebody says they're going to talk VDI, I think normally people have an expectation about what they're going to hear. I'm hoping that actually you've just sat up and gone, oh, that wasn't what I was going to hear at all. It wasn't what I was expecting at all, rather. It is a different perspective. So feel free to reach out to me if you want to have a chat about this. If you've got a challenge, if you've got something that you want to have a look at and maybe have a look at it slightly differently, because I genuinely think that's what this is all about. I think we're in a new world at the moment of end user computing, and I think, you know, this is about the next generation. That's what this summit is all about. The next generation is already here. The next generation think differently to us. The people coming into work now want different things, and they're going to keep demanding them. And if we don't give them to them, they're going to find ways around it. And they grew up with technology, so they're going to find ways around it. So I think embrace it. Let's go out there and let's see what we can do and take a different view. So thank you for your time. I hope this was useful. And I look forward to catching up with you on another webinar soon.